He didn't see her as anything more than a poor cleaner. But when the billionaire suspected she'd stolen from him, he followed her through the rain, certain he'd catch her red-handed. Sit back, because this isn't just a story. It's a journey you'll want to follow to the very end. The rain fell in slow, heavy drops, drumming on the sleek black roof of Dominic Okoro's Bentley. The streets of Banana Island glistened under the streetlights, puddles rippling each time a car passed. From inside his car, Dominic's sharp eyes followed a slim figure in a faded, umbrella-less coat. Alicia. He hadn't seen her in years. They shared a past, one he had chosen not to think about, but tonight, seeing her walking close to his property pulled his attention. He decided to follow. He kept a safe distance, his car blending into the evening traffic. The rain became heavier. Alicia walked briskly, stepping over puddles, never once looking back. She reached a narrow street where the mansions and streetlights gave way to small, crowded compounds. Dominic parked a little distance away and watched. Alicia entered through a rusty black gate. Seconds later, the sound of excited voices broke through the rain. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ran out into the open yard. Their laughter was high and bright against the gloomy weather. They were about 5 years old, wearing mismatched clothes but full of energy. "Mummy!" they called, rushing to her. She dropped her bag on a small bench and knelt down, gathering them into her arms. The boys, Mark and Michael, pressed their faces into her shoulders, and the little girl, Michelle, clung to her neck. Dominic's hand froze on the steering wheel. His heart gave a strange, heavy thud. They looked like him. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their noses. Even the way one boy tilted his head when smiling was like looking at a smaller version of himself. He sat there for a long moment, rain sliding down the windscreen, his mind caught between disbelief and irritation. He didn't want to believe it. This was Alicia, an orphan, a cleaner who had once scrubbed his floors just to pay school fees. And now here she was, with 3 children who might share his blood. Dominic's jaw tightened. He didn't want any part of it. He had no interest in a poor maid's life or her problems. Without stepping out of the car, without speaking to her, he started the engine, turned away from the compound, and drove back into the night. This wasn't how it all began. Everything had changed between them, 5 years ago. The bathroom was silent that day, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Its walls were smooth white marble, and the lights above the mirror were bright enough to make every detail sharp. Alicia stood barefoot on the cold tiles, holding a small plastic stick in her trembling hand. 2 pink lines. She blinked, hoping her eyes were playing tricks on her. But the lines stayed, clear and certain. Her heart raced. She pressed her free hand against her stomach, still flat beneath her blouse. "A baby," she whispered. Her voice broke a little, but she said it again, softer, "Our baby." Fear rose in her chest, mixing with a strange warmth she couldn't explain. She was only 22, in her final year studying computer science at the University of Lagos. There were still projects to submit, exams to write, and a degree to earn. And yet, standing here in Dominic's penthouse bathroom, she felt like her life had just taken a sharp turn she couldn't undo. Her eyes lifted to the large mirror. The woman staring back at her had deep brown eyes filled with nervous hope. A few strands of dark hair had fallen over her face, and she tucked them behind her ear without thinking. She thought of the life she had before him. The neighborhood's crowded streets, the cramped one-room apartment she shared with her grandmother, Mama Grace. The nights she stayed up late studying by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. She had worked hard to get this far, taking part-time jobs, tutoring and cleaning houses. And now, this. A knock came on the bathroom door. "Alicia." Dominic's voice was deep, calm. "Are you okay in there?" She swallowed hard, hiding the pregnancy test in her pocket. "Yes," she said quickly, "I'm fine." But she knew nothing was fine anymore. Her mind quickly drifted back to the day it all began. It was the University of Lagos Technology Innovation Showcase. The large hall buzzed with voices, the air warm with excitement. Students moved from table to table, showing off their projects to lecturers, guests, and industry professionals. Alicia stood behind her small table, her laptop open, charts and diagrams neatly arranged beside it. She spoke with quiet confidence, explaining her final year project, a healthcare predictive analytics algorithm designed to help detect health risks early, especially in rural communities where hospitals were far away. As she finished explaining to a small group of students, she noticed someone standing a few steps away. Tall, well-built, wearing a dark tailored suit that fit perfectly on his broad shoulders. His face was calm but attentive, his deep brown eyes fixed on her. Dominic Okoro. She didn't know his name then, but she could tell he wasn't just another visitor. There was a quiet authority in the way people moved aside for him without being asked. When the group left, he stepped forward. "Your work is impressive," he said, his voice smooth and low. "You're bringing healthcare to the people. That's something this country needs." Alicia felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she replied, a little surprised that someone like him had taken an interest. They talked for a few minutes. He asked about her inspiration, her process, her future plans. She told him about her hope to make the system accessible to clinics in remote areas. Before leaving, he handed her his card. "Call me if you ever need advice or guidance," he said with a small smile. They exchanged contacts that day, and a week later he reached out, inviting her for coffee to discuss her project further. That meeting turned into several, and slowly she began to see a different side of him. Not just the wealthy businessman, but someone who seemed genuinely curious about her ideas. One afternoon, over coffee, she mentioned she was desperately searching for a part-time job to support her grandmother and pay her school fees. Dominic hesitated before speaking. "I might know of something, but I'm not sure it's for you." "What is it?" she asked. "I'm looking for a temporary cleaner for my house," he admitted.
"But I didn't think someone like you would be interested." Alicia smiled faintly. "I don't mind. Work is work. As long as it's honest, I'm willing to do it." He shook his head. "You're a final year student. You shouldn't be scrubbing floors." "But I need the job," she insisted. "I can work evenings and weekends. It won't affect my studies." After a moment, he gave in. "All right, but it's temporary, just until I find someone else." She nodded. A week after their coffee meeting, Alicia stepped through the large double doors of Dominic's home for the first time, not as a guest, but as a worker. The mansion in Victoria Island was everything her small apartment was not. Quiet, spacious, spotless. The air smelled faintly of fresh lilies, and the sound of the ocean could be heard from the balcony. She started with the basics, dusting shelves, cleaning windows, mopping the marble floors. Dominic was polite but kept his distance at first, speaking only when necessary. He left early for meetings, returned late, and most of the time they exchanged little more than greetings. But soon things began to shift. One evening she was wiping down the glass dining table when he came in earlier than usual. "You're still here?" he asked. "I just have a few more things to finish," she said without looking up. "Come," he said after a pause. "Let's take a short break." That evening, instead of heading home after her shift, she found herself standing at the edge of his private dock. Dominic untied his small speedboat and motioned for her to climb in. The city lights reflected on the water as they sped across the lagoon. The wind whipped her hair, and for the first time in weeks she laughed freely. After that, the lines between employer and employee blurred. There were weekend getaways to Abuja, dinners at RSVP where the waiters seemed to know him by name, and quiet evenings at the cinema where he booked entire rows so they could watch without disturbance. Dominic was charming in a way that made her forget where she came from. He asked about her studies, listened to her ideas, and sometimes challenged her opinions just to hear her defend them. When Alicia's grandmother, Mama Grace, found out, she wasn't impressed. One evening, as Alicia washed dishes in their small kitchen, Mama Grace sat on a stool, her eyes sharp and steady. "Men like that don't marry poor women," she said quietly. "They marry politicians' daughters, or women from their own world." Alicia rinsed the last plate and turned to face her. "Mama, you don't understand. Dominic isn't like that. He sees me for who I am, not for where I come from." Mama Grace shook her head slowly. "I just don't want to see you hurt." But Alicia smiled, convinced that this was different. Convinced that Dominic saw a future with her too. Now, Alicia's thought jolted back to the present. Still standing in the bathroom, she stared down at the small plastic strip in her hand. 2 pink lines. Her heart was still racing, but a warm hope was slowly pushing away the fear. She imagined telling him how his face might light up,
how they might talk about names, how he might hold her and promise that they would do this together. She took a deep breath, slipped the test into her pocket, and stepped out of the bathroom. Dominic was in the living room, scrolling through something on his phone. She smiled faintly and told herself she would tell him soon. The following day, everything changed. One of Dominic's major real estate deals collapsed. News spread quickly in his circle, and by the time he came home that evening, he was a different man. His tie hung loosely around his neck, his shirt was wrinkled, and his usually composed face looked tired and tense. Alicia noticed right away. She walked over, gently taking his briefcase from his hand. "More deals will come," she said softly. "Setbacks are normal, in life and in business. This one didn't work out, but there will be others." He managed a weak smile. "You always know what to say." Her heart thudded. Maybe this was the right moment. Maybe the news would lift his spirits. "I have something to tell you," she said, sitting beside him. She hesitated, then placed a hand over her stomach. "Dominic, I'm pregnant." For a moment, he just stared at her, unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a check, and began to write. When he handed it to her, the figure made her blink. $30,000. "Take this," he said flatly. "We can pretend this mistake never happened." Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Mistake," she repeated, her voice shaking. "This isn't the right time," he said, avoiding her eyes. "You're young, you have your studies, and this will only hold me back." Alicia's hand trembled as she looked down at the check. Rage burned hot in her chest. She tore it in half, then again, until the pieces fluttered to the floor like bits. "Was I just your little experiment?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Something to brag about before you moved on?" Dominic straightened his tie, his face closing off completely. Alicia grabbed her bag and walked to the door, her steps fast and unsteady. She didn't look back. That was the day everything between them ended. The heavy front door closing behind her with a dull thud. The cool evening air hit her face, but it did nothing to ease the heat burning in her chest. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks as she walked quickly to the bus stop, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. By the time she reached Mama Grace's cramped house, her eyes were swollen, and her throat ached from holding back sobs. Mama Grace was sitting on a low stool in the corner, sorting through a pile of second-hand clothes she planned to sell at the market. She looked up, instantly reading the pain on Alicia's face. "My child," she said softly, rising to meet her. She pulled Alicia into her arms, the familiar smell of soap and wood smoke wrapping around her like a blanket. Alicia buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder. "I am pregnant, Mama, and he doesn't want the baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He offered me money to get rid of it." Mama Grace's arms tightened around her. "We will find a way," she said firmly. "We always have." That night, lying on the thin mattress they shared, Alicia stared at the ceiling. She could hear the distant noise of generators, the hum of the neighborhood settling into the night. Her mind was a storm, anger, hurt, and a sharp determination growing inside her. Dominic hadn't called, hadn't sent a message, hadn't done anything. That told her everything she needed to know. She placed a hand over her stomach. "I'll be there for you," she promised silently. "Even if it's just me." The next morning, she woke up early and started looking for work. Within a week, she found a job as a waitress at a small restaurant not far from home. The pay was barely enough, but it was something. She worked long hours, on her feet from morning until night, carrying trays, cleaning tables, and forcing a smile for customers even when her legs ached. Every day was hard, but she reminded herself why she was doing it, because she had someone to fight for now. A few weeks after she started working on a sunny afternoon, the restaurant was busy. The smell of fried rice and sizzling beef filled the air as customers' voices rose above the clatter of plates. Alicia moved quickly between tables, balancing a heavy tray in one hand and a coffee pot in the other. She had barely eaten since morning, and the heat from the small kitchen made her dizzy. But she pushed through it, telling herself she could rest later. As she reached a corner table with 2 steaming plates, A wave of weakness washed over her. The room blurred and the voices around her became distant. She tried to steady herself, but her legs gave way. "Alicia!" someone shouted as the tray clattered to the floor. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on a narrow bed in the small clinic down the street. A nurse was checking her blood pressure, and an older doctor with kind eyes stood at the foot of the bed. "You fainted," the doctor said gently. "We ran some tests to make sure you and the babies are all right." Alicia sat up slowly, her heart thudding. "The babies?" The doctor smiled faintly. "Not just one baby. You're carrying 3. Her eyes widened. "3?" she whispered. He nodded. "Triplets, all with strong heartbeats." For a moment, Alicia felt as if the air had been knocked out of her. The idea of raising one child on her own had been daunting enough. Now she was going to be a mother to 3. She leaned back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. Fear pressed down on her chest, but underneath it there was something else, a stubborn, steady determination. She placed a hand over her stomach. "If Dominic wants nothing to do with us," she said quietly, "then I won't beg him. We'll be fine without him." She didn't feel strong in that moment, but she knew she would have to be for them. The news of the triplets had shaken Alicia to her core, but it also lit a fire in her she didn't know she had. From that day, she promised herself she would do whatever it took to protect and provide for the 3 little lives growing inside her. Her days became a blur of movement. She worked double shifts at the restaurant, serving plates and wiping tables long after her back began to ache. On top of that, she still attended her final year classes, her belly growing heavier each week. By the time she got home at night, her feet were swollen, and her body screamed for rest, but she pushed through. Mama Grace tried to help where she could, but one afternoon Alicia came home to find her grandmother lying weakly on the bed, a hand pressed to her chest. The trip to the clinic confirmed what Alicia feared. Mama Grace was ill and needed both medication and rest. The pressure doubled. Alicia now had to care for her grandmother, keep up with her classes, and work enough to pay for rent, food, and hospital bills. One morning after class, she lingered behind to pack her books when a familiar voice called her name. "Alicia." She turned to see Dr. Williams, one of her lecturers, standing at the door. He was a kind man in his late 40s, known for encouraging his students. "I've noticed you've been under a lot of strain lately," he said gently. "You're talented, Alicia. I'd hate to see you give up your future because of your situation." She looked down, unsure what to say. He stepped closer. "A friend of mine is working on a small tech project and needs a part-time programmer. The pay isn't much, but you can work from home and set your own hours." Alicia's eyes brightened. "I'll take it." Dr. Williams smiled. "I'll send you the details this evening. I believe in you. Don't give up." That night, after putting Mama Grace to bed, Alicia set up her small borrowed laptop at the kitchen table. The hum of the fridge was the only sound as she began typing, her fingers moving with purpose. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't solve all her problems, but it was a start. And for Alicia, a start was enough. The months passed in a blur of work, study, and worry. Somehow Alicia kept moving forward. Each morning she attended her lectures, her growing belly making it harder to sit through long hours. Each afternoon she worked at the restaurant, and each night she coded at the kitchen table while Mama Grace slept. By the time her final exams were over, Alicia was exhausted but relieved. She had made it through. Graduation day arrived with a bright, hot sun hanging over the city, and Alicia put on her gown with trembling hands. She couldn't stop smiling. Despite everything, she had reached this milestone. But halfway through the ceremony, as names were being called and applause filled the air, a sharp pain gripped her lower belly. She gasped, her hands flying to her stomach. Another pain followed, stronger this time. Within minutes, she was in the back of a taxi, Mama Grace holding her hand, urging the driver to go faster. At the hospital, the hours blurred into each other. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her body shook with every contraction. Then, finally, the cries came. 3 tiny but powerful voices that filled the room. Her heart swelled as the nurse placed the first baby in her arms. "Mark," she whispered, touching his cheek. The second followed soon after. She smiled through tears. "Michael?" And then the third, her only daughter small but fierce in her cries. Michelle. 3 healthy babies, 3 reasons to keep fighting. Life after that was harder than Alicia had imagined. The nights were long, filled with feedings, diaper changes, and the soft cries of her children. During the day, she worked on coding projects, often with one baby strapped to her chest while the other 2 napped in a crib borrowed from a neighbor. She was tired in her bones, but each time she looked at their tiny faces, determination pushed her forward. She was their mother, their protector, their provider, and no matter how hard it got, she would not fail them. The months slowly eased into a rhythm. Mama Grace, with rest and steady medication, grew stronger again. She was soon back on her feet. Despite being old, she could still move around the house, helping with the children. Her laugh returned, her voice filled the small rooms, and Alicia felt a little of the weight lift from her shoulders. When the triplets' first birthday came around, Alicia didn't have much money for a celebration, but Mama Grace insisted they mark the day. She baked a small batch of cupcakes in the old oven, the sweet smell filling the air. In the corner, a box of colorful hand-sewn toys sat waiting, Mama Grace's gift to her great-grandchildren. She had stitched them from leftover fabric scraps, each one soft and unique. They gathered in the tiny living room, the triplets sitting on a mat spread over the floor. Mark and Michael clapped their hands, while Alicia placed a candle in the center of a cupcake. Michelle leaned toward it, her big eyes curious. Then, in the middle of the laughter and clapping, Michelle looked up at Alicia and said it, clear and certain. "Mummy." Alicia froze for a second, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. She pulled Michelle into her arms, kissing her cheek as tears stung her eyes. "Yes, baby, I'm your mummy." That night, after the children were asleep, Alicia sat at her small desk with her laptop open. Around her feet, the triplets crawled and babbled, refusing to stay in bed for long. She didn't mind. She had grown used to working with them close by. She was building something, an app she called Care Predict Health. It used AI-powered diagnostics to predict potential health issues early, even in areas with limited medical facilities. Most nights, the only light in the room came from the laptop screen, her fingers tapping away as the soft sound of the baby's play filled the space. She was tired, but this work was more than just a job. It was her way forward, the bridge to the life she wanted for them. And she was determined to finish it. The years passed quickly. Mark, Michael, and Michelle grew into lively, curious 5-year-olds, filling the small home with laughter, questions, and the constant sound of little feet pattering across the floor. Mama Grace grew slower with time, her once quick hands moving gently now, her voice softer. She still told stories at night, still blessed the children before bed, but Alicia could see the years weighing on her. One quiet morning, Alicia found her grandmother lying peacefully on the bed, her hands folded over her chest. The doctor later said it was old age, her body had simply reached its time. The funeral was simple. Neighbors came, as did the women from the church and a few of Mama Grace's friends from the market. They sang hymns in the small yard, their voices trembling but strong. Alicia stood with her children close, trying to be steady for them, even as grief pressed heavily on her chest. A few days after the burial, Alicia received a meeting request from an investor who had shown interest in Care Predict Health. She was hesitant when she saw the address. It was in Banana Island. Memories she had buried years ago rose quickly. Dominic's face, his cold voice, the way everything had ended. She almost declined, but she told herself rich people hardly wandered their neighborhoods. The chances of running into him were slim. So she went. The meeting ended in polite discussion. No promises made yet. She walked out of the tall glass building, head full of new possibilities for her project. What she didn't know was that Dominic had seen her. From the moment his eyes caught her figure on the street, he had followed, discreetly, staying far enough back so she wouldn't notice. His mind twisted the sight into something else entirely. He assumed she had come to beg. Or maybe to steal. He didn't know that she had built a life without him, that she was shaping a future for herself and her children, a future he had no part in. And Alicia didn't care if he had seen her. It had been almost 6 years since he last called, and she had long learned to manage on her own. That was how the path had led them both to that rainy Lagos evening, the same one where 3 children had run out to greet her, and Dominic had frozen in shock in his car, wondering about faces that looked so much like his own. That rainy evening passed without Alicia knowing she had been followed. Life moved on, and she didn't think about Dominic again until months later, when their paths crossed in a way she couldn't avoid. It was at the Lagos Medical Innovation Gala, a night of bright lights, glittering gowns, and polished speeches. She had been invited to present her work on care predict health. She was dressed in a simple but elegant gown. The night progressed peacefully, and she was greeting a small group of doctors when she saw him. Dominic, standing across the room, still tall, still commanding attention, but his eyes were sharper, his expression harder.
He approached slowly, his eyes sizing her up and down. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone clipped. "People like you don't belong in this circle. You should leave." The words stung, but Alicia's face stayed calm. She said nothing. She had no reason to defend herself, not to him. After a moment, she turned away, walking toward another group without looking back. That night, when the gala was over and the children were asleep, she opened her laptop and got back to work. Dominic's words didn't matter. Her mission did. Over the years, she had saved carefully, every extra penny from her coding contracts, every small grant she'd earned. With that money, she rented a small office space where she and the children worked together. Mark and Michael helped install software on second-hand computers. Michelle kept the files in order and greeted visitors with her bright smile. Months later, at a medical symposium in Abuja, she demonstrated the Care Predict system live. As attendees watched, it flagged an irregular pattern in the data from a senior cardiologist in the audience, early signs of a possible stroke risk. The man was stunned, and further tests confirmed it. Word spread quickly. Investors began to take notice. Health Alliance, a major international health technology company, called her in for a meeting. Their offer was jaw-dropping, $1.2 billion to buy Care Predict outright. Alicia listened quietly, then shook her head. "We're not for sale," she said simply. She left the meeting with her head high. Her mission wasn't to cash out. It was to make healthcare more accessible for people who needed it most. And she wasn't going to hand it over for any price. Turning down the $1.2 billion offer was a gamble, but Alicia never doubted her decision. In the months that followed, Care Predict Health completed a series of international clinical trials, achieving a groundbreaking 99.4% accuracy rate in detecting early health risks. The results made headlines across the continent. Hospitals from Lagos to Nairobi, Accra to Johannesburg signed partnership agreements to integrate the system into their diagnostics. The work was demanding, constant meetings, updates, and travel, but Alicia approached it with the same steady determination she'd had since the day she walked out of Dominic's house. Invitations to prestigious conferences began pouring in. She spoke on global stages about healthcare accessibility, AI technology, and innovation in Africa. Each time, she reminded audiences that her journey had begun at a kitchen table with a borrowed laptop and 3 babies crawling around her feet. By now, those babies were no longer small. Mark, Michael, and Michelle were 15, tall, confident, and every bit as driven as their mother. Each had found a passion and pursued it with relentless focus. At home, the dining table often turned into a mini innovation lab. Mark, the robotics genius, worked on a compact drone prototype for delivering medical supplies to rural areas. Michael, fascinated by aeronautics engineering, spent hours designing energy-efficient aircraft models. Michelle leaned towards medicine, often sitting beside Alicia during meetings with doctors, asking sharp, insightful questions about diagnosis and treatment. They weren't just her children. They were her partners in building something bigger than all of them. The boys entered national robotics and engineering competitions, returning home with trophies and certificates. Michelle earned a place in a Young Medical Innovators program, where she was the youngest participant by 3 years. In the evenings, they coded together, bouncing ideas off one another. The air would be filled with quiet concentration, broken only by bursts of excitement when a new feature worked or a stubborn bug was finally fixed. Alicia often sat back in those moments, just watching them, her heart swelling with pride. She had raised not just survivors, but dreamers, builders of the future. It had been almost 16 years since that day in Dominic's living room, more than a decade and a half since Alicia had walked out with nothing but her dignity and a life growing inside her. In all that time, she had never spoken badly about him to the children. She had told them only that their father chose not to be in their lives, and left it at that. But now, with Mark, Michael, and Michelle grown into thoughtful, intelligent teenagers, she knew it was time to tell them the full truth. One quiet Sunday evening, they sat around the living room, laptops and books set aside. The air was still. Alicia clasped her hands in her lap, steadying her breath before she began. "There's something you should know about your father," she said gently. The three of them looked at her, curious but calm. "I told you before that he didn't want to be in your lives. That was true. But I didn't tell you everything." Her voice softened. "When I found out I was pregnant, I went to him. I thought he would be happy, or at least willing to be part of it. Instead, he offered me a check." Alicia nodded slowly. "I tore it up, and from that day I never heard from him again. No calls and no letters, nothing." The boys exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of anger and quiet understanding. "I never told you this before because I didn't want you to carry bitterness," she said. "I wanted you to grow up knowing love, not resentment. But you're old enough now to understand the truth." They were silent for a moment. Then Michael reached over and took her hand. "You've given us more than he ever could." Mark added quietly, "We know who our real parent is." Alicia smiled faintly, her heart heavy and light at the same time. Not long after that conversation, an invitation arrived for Alicia to attend the Lagos high-profile Medical Innovation Gala. CarePredict was to be honored for its contributions to healthcare across Africa. She decided the children would attend with her. It would be a learning experience, a chance to see the world they were helping to shape. On the night of the gala, they arrived together. Mark and Michael wore perfectly tailored dark suits, their ties neat and their shoulders squared. Michelle glowed in an elegant gown, her hair swept up, her smile warm but composed. As they stepped into the venue, cameras flashed. Reporters called their names. The children handled it with ease, answering questions politely, shaking hands confidently, making a strong impression on everyone they met. Alicia watched them, pride radiating from her. She had built this life from the ground up, and now they were stepping into it with grace. She didn't know the night would bring a confrontation years in the making. While Alicia and her children stepped into the bright, camera-filled entrance of the gala, somewhere across the city, Dominic Okoro was dressing in front of his mirror, adjusting a bow tie that felt tighter than usual. The last few years had been brutal for him. His once mighty real estate empire had crumbled under the weight of bad investments and risky deals. 2 expensive divorces had bled him dry. And the final blow, a bribery scandal that stripped him of key contracts and his last shred of untouchable reputation, left him scrambling to stay relevant in the circles where he once ruled. The mansion in Victoria Island was gone. The properties in Abuja had been sold. Even his art collection had been auctioned off quietly to pay debts. He still had a few investments scattered across various sectors, but only one had grown instead of shrinking. CarePredict Health. To Dominic, it was just another stock he'd picked up years ago, one of many small obscure holdings his financial manager had bundled together. He had no idea who actually ran it or how it had exploded in value. That night, he wasn't thinking about business strategy. He was thinking about survival. His oldest friend, Greg, had been blunt on the phone earlier that week. "You need to be seen again, Dominic. The gala is the perfect opportunity. People will remember you. It'll help you get back into circulation." Dominic had resisted at first, but in the end he agreed. He couldn't afford to keep hiding. Appearances were everything. And tonight, he would try to remind people that Dominic Okoro was still a name worth knowing. He stepped into the black car waiting outside, the city lights reflecting in the tinted windows as they made their way to the venue. Inside, he planned to shake hands, exchange smiles, and rebuild a little of the image he had lost. What he didn't plan on, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the most profitable stock in his portfolio belonged to the same woman he had discarded nearly 16 years ago.
and that she would be standing in the very same room before the night was over. The gala hall shimmered with golden light, the sound of soft jazz floating over the murmur of conversation. Dominic moved through the crowd with the ease of habit, offering polite smiles, exchanging firm handshakes, doing exactly what Greg had advised, being seen. He was midway through greeting an old business contact when something caught his eye across the room. A woman. Not just any woman, Alicia. She stood near the main stage, dressed in a sleek, deep blue gown that seemed to catch the light with every movement. Beside her were 3 teenagers, 2 tall boys in sharp suits, and a girl in an elegant gown, her hair styled perfectly. They moved confidently among doctors, investors, and politicians, speaking with the kind of composure Dominic had rarely seen in people their age. The sight hit him like a punch. He knew those faces. They were the same 3 children he had seen years ago in that small compound, the day he followed Alicia home in the rain. Only now they were older, sharper, more defined, and there was no mistaking it. They looked just like him. His chest tightened. The resemblance was too strong to ignore. The tilt of Mark's jaw, the shape of Michael's eyes, the quiet confidence in Michelle's smile. For a moment, Dominic simply stood there, frozen in the middle of the room, as the noise of the gala faded around him. Finally, he began to move, weaving through the crowd until he was close enough for Alicia to notice him. Her smile, mid-conversation with a hospital director, faltered slightly when she saw him.
"Alicia," he said quietly. She gave a polite nod, her eyes guarded. "Dominic, we need to talk," he murmured. Without answering, she excused herself from the group and walked toward the terrace, the glass doors sliding shut behind them. The cool night air carried the faint scent of rain. Dominic turned to face her, his voice low but tense. "Those children, they're mine, aren't they?" Alicia's gaze didn't waver. "Don't you think it is too late to ask that now?" "I don't think so," he said, his tone hardening. "I want to meet them." She folded her arms. "You had your chance, Dominic. You walked away before they were even born." His jaw tightened. "They're still my children." Alicia shook her head slowly. "They're my children. And they've grown up just fine without you." The cool night breeze drifted across the terrace, carrying the weight of old wounds between them. Alicia's arms slowly lowered from her chest. Her voice softened, though her eyes stayed steady. "They're my children, yes. But they're yours too, Dominic, whether you were there or not." He said nothing, his gaze fixed on her as if trying to read the years he had missed. She let out a quiet breath. "You weren't there when they were born. You didn't see their first steps or hear their first words. You wanted them gone, but you deserved to see them once." Without waiting for his reply, Alicia turned and led him back into the gala hall. The chatter and music swelled around them as she guided him toward a corner where the children stood, speaking with a young doctor. "Mark, Michael, Michelle," Alicia said gently, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "This is Dominic, your father." The 3 exchanged a brief glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Then Mark, the calmer of the boys, stepped forward. His voice was polite, his tone controlled. "Sir, our family values time and purpose," he said evenly. "You showed neither when it mattered." Dominic blinked, caught between pride at the boy's confidence and the sting of his words. Alicia's voice followed, calm but resolute. "I never wanted anything from you, not money, not child support, nothing that might come with strings. We built our lives without your help." Michelle took a small step forward, her eyes clear and steady. "We already have everything we need," she said simply. "Mummy made sure of that." Dominic looked at the 3 of them, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of what he had lost and knew he could never get it back. Dominic's jaw tightened as he took a step closer, his voice low but urgent. "They're mine. I'm your father." Michael's expression didn't change, but his words cut with the precision of a blade. "Being a father requires presence," he said calmly. "You were statistically replaceable." The hum of the gala carried on around them,
Laughter, clinking glasses, polite conversation. Yet in their small corner, the air felt heavy and still. Dominic's gaze moved between the three of them, searching for a crack in their resolve, a sign that they might soften. But there was none. Without another word, Mark turned to his brother and sister. Michelle glanced at Alicia, who gave a small nod. Together, the three teenagers walked away, their movements unhurried, their posture proud. Dominic's eyes followed them, his chest tight with a strange mix of anger and regret. Alicia lingered just a moment longer. She looked him in the eye, her voice steady but not unkind. "We built a world where your words hold no power." Then she turned and walked away, her gown brushing lightly against the marble floor, her children at her side. Dominic stood alone in the crowd, surrounded by people yet more isolated than he had ever felt in his life. Alicia didn't look back. The cool night air outside the gala felt lighter than the chandelier-lit room they had just left. Her children walked on either side of her, their steps in sync, the sound of their polished shoes firm against the pavement. They reached the waiting car, and as the driver opened the door, Michelle glanced up at her mother. "Are you okay?" Alicia smiled faintly, her eyes soft. "Better than okay." She took a breath, letting the truth settle deep in her heart. "You three handled yourselves with grace tonight. I couldn't be prouder." Mark leaned back against the seat once they were inside. "We said what needed to be said," Michael added with quiet certainty. "And we have work to do tomorrow." Alicia's lips curved into a smile. That was exactly what she loved about them. Always forward-looking, never letting the past weigh them down. Care Predict had grown beyond even her earliest dreams. It had expanded to offices across Africa, now operating in 38 countries around the globe. The platform was saving lives daily, and Alicia Okafor's name had just been listed on Forbes as one of the most influential women in global healthcare innovation. As the city lights of Lagos passed by outside the car window, Alicia thought of how far they had come, and how none of it would have been possible if she had chosen to hold on to someone who didn't choose them back. Somewhere else in the city, Dominic's world was closing in. News had broken earlier that day. The EFCC had frozen his remaining assets pending an investigation into years of financial misconduct. The man who once had everything was now fighting to keep even the little he had left. Alicia didn't celebrate his downfall. She didn't need to. Her victory was here beside her, in the three extraordinary people she had raised, in the lives her work was touching, in the freedom she had built with her own hands. Alicia looked at them, pride welling so deeply that it almost brought tears to her eyes. They were not just her children. They were her greatest success story. And together they would keep walking forward,